So good to have you join us today. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Jae-in in Seoul. Coming up on today's Business Daily. The United Nations predicts the global economy to keep growing over the next 2 years thanks to a modest recovery in trade and investment worldwide. With the Moon Jae-in government considering a supplementary budget focused on job creation, eyes are on whether this will be feasible. These stories and more coming right up. It looks like the global economy is slowly finding itself on feet to path to recovery. The United Nations has confirmed its earlier projections that there will be a slight uptick in growth this year. Our Oh Soo-young starts us off.
The United Nations has confirmed an earlier projection that the world economy will see a modest recovery in growth this year. In a mid-year update of its report on the world's economic situation, UN economists forecast the world gross product, a combination of all goods and services produced globally, to expand by 2.7% this year and 2.9% in 2018.
At the global level, economic growth has strengthened in recent months, in line with the forecast presented in January. Industrial production has picked up, world trade is reviving, and economic sentiment has generally improved.
Growth in the US is expected to amount to 2.1% this year, 1.7% in the European Union, and 5.8% in East and South Asia. However, the mid-year report says various uncertainties could undermine the slight recovery. Negative interest rates in Japan and European countries, as well as the timing of rate hikes in the US, could potentially trigger financial volatility, as well as reverse capital inflows to developing economies. In fact, the report expresses concern that the mild uptick in global growth will not be shared evenly across all nations. The world's least developed countries are expected to see growth of an estimated 4.7% in 2017 and 5.3% next year, which fall well below the Sustainable Development Goal target of 7% per annum.
Under the current growth trajectory, without a decline in income inequality, nearly 35% of the population in least developed countries may remain in extreme poverty by 2030.
UN economists urge governments to do more to coordinate international policies for a balanced and sustained revival of global growth so that no regions are left behind. Oh Soo-young, Business Daily.
Korea's export-import prices in April rebounded for the first time in 3 months due to rising oil prices. The Bank of Korea said in a preliminary report that import prices rose 0.5% in April from the previous month to nearly 82. The central bank says the rise was largely driven by the price of Korea's benchmark Dubai crude, which jumped more than 2% to around $52 a barrel. Export prices also inched up 0.5% last month, with large increases seen in prices of flash memory and DRAM chips. And moving on to markets, to give us a brief picture of this week's stock market action, we have our Business Daily's markets contributor Choi Jin-seok joining us on the phone today. Hello, Jin-seok.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so how are things looking on today's market?
The Korean equity market didn't move much during today's session. The Kospi fell slightly by 0.1% to close at 2293.08, while the Kosdaq rose by 0.14% to close at 640. The Kospi market opened the session with a slight downtick and fell for the first time in 3 sessions as both foreign investors and institutions unloaded shares. The Kospi then erased early losses in late hours, once reversing its trend into positive territory. Cosmetics companies and duty-free stores led the way in this comeback as expectations for better Korea-China relations rose significantly. However, the market failed to finish the session with a rise as retail investors were the only net buyers and foreigners changed their position to buy shares in the last minute on the Kospi. Meanwhile, the Kosdaq market stayed in positive territory during most of the session, but it lost its momentum in late hours. Institutions sold shares on the Kosdaq as well, dragging down the index.
Now, though foreign investors seem to have become somewhat hesitant to buy recently, on a monthly basis, they bought massive amounts of shares, right?
Exactly. Official data showed today that offshore investors' buying spree of Korean shares lasted through a fifth straight month in April, with investment mostly focused on blue chip stocks. The Financial Supervisory Service, or the FSS, said foreign investors bought a net 1.26 trillion Korean won worth of stocks on the Kospi and the Kosdaq market. Although the amount was nearly half of what it was in March, that extends the net buying trend to 5 months. In particular, foreigners bought 3 times the amount of shares on the Kospi compared to the Kosdaq. By region, investors from Europe bought, while those from the U.S. and Asia unloaded shares. Foreigners bought Korean bonds for the fourth straight month in April as well. Demand for Korean bonds was strongest in Asia, where investors now hold 41.2 trillion Korean won.
Now, earlier this week, you mentioned that concerns over weak economic indicators over in the U.S. and earnings from major retailers might affect overall sentiment. So how are things looking on that so far?
Right. The results have been positive so far. Home Depot reported Q1 earnings mostly topping market estimates, and the company's share prices rose slightly overnight. America's industrial production rose at the fastest pace in more than 3 years as well. Helped by such positive factors, the U.S. market overnight could erase most of its early losses. However, it's questionable whether uncertainty surrounding weak economic data, disappointing earnings, and President Donald Trump's Russia leak issue will be removed. Such concerns are still affecting the sentiment among foreign investors in the Korean market, as well as we've witnessed over the past few sessions. Moreover, we need to focus on the fact that most companies that experienced a rally in the U.S. were tech firms benefiting from a recent ransomware attack. Therefore, it is expected to take some more time for global markets to reclaim their momentum. This has been Choi Jin-seok for Business Daily.
President Moon Jae-in has pledged to give all irregular workers in the public sector regular positions. Now, that could be quite a task because at the moment, it turns out that 1 in 3 of all workers at public enterprises do not hold regular positions. Seoul-based management evaluation firm CEO Score took a look at 35 public companies, and they found that out of more than 170,000 employees, almost 60,000 were irregular. Their numbers have risen by more than 22% over the last 5 years, while that of regular workers rose just 6%. The company with the highest proportion of irregular jobs was Korea's main gateway, Incheon International Airport, at nearly 86%. Now, it's been a week since President Moon Jae-in took office, and today we'll dig deeper into his economic policies. What new approach will the administration take to drive up growth? With more, here's our Oh Jung-hee.
The first task President Moon ordered upon taking office was forming a committee on job creation. And just 2 days after his inauguration, the Finance Ministry officially confirmed that it could execute a supplementary budget to boost growth. On the campaign trail, President Moon called for a new era of economic reform, stressing that his J-nomics will support economic growth with the people at the center.
사람에게 투자해 기업과 국가의 경쟁력을 살리는 사람 중심의 경제 성장 구조로
J-nomics is an economic growth plan made up of 4 stages. Creating jobs will help the middle class and ordinary citizens earn more so that they spend more. And in turn, this creates a virtuous cycle where the overall economy grows. Big corporations and SMEs will have to cooperate with each other and find strategies for the 4th industrial revolution. Despite difficult economic situations in and out of the country, we will be able to see growth if all stages go smoothly.
Expansionary fiscal policies are the key. Under President Moon, the government will double the growth rate of its fiscal spending to 7% starting this year, with further increases to come through 2020. The government will reduce tax benefits for major conglomerates and raise corporate taxes in line with public consensus while proceeding with fiscal reform. Raising taxes for ordinary citizens will only be a last resort. International organizations like the IMF and the OECD have already noted that Korea has enough room to execute fiscal policy measures. The move to inject vitality into the overall economy starts from the public sector, taking the lead in job creation by creating 810,000 jobs and converting irregular workers to regular status.
President Moon is going to focus on making jobs in the public sector first, and then he said that the public sector job is going to induce the private sector job. How to make more jobs for the young people and also how to narrow the wage gap is the biggest problem and the biggest challenge to the President Moon.
The new administration will aim to change the general business environment as well to guarantee the peaceful coexistence of big corporations and small and mid-sized companies. The government will intervene to promote fair deals between big companies and their subcontractors while eliminating many regulations on SMEs and startups.
Moon has pledged to ban big corporations from invading the markets of small business and taking away the SME's piece of the pie. Until now, deregulation has really benefited the chaebols, not SMEs or startups. We are going to leave as few regulations as possible for new industries.
Overall, it's a big paradigm shift from Korea's conventional growth model. The government's primary focus will be shifted from nurturing the conglomerate's businesses and expanding their influence to directly improving the livelihoods of the general public. This is a big change, so the public will have to wait and see what it brings.
The Korean economy has grown using the trickle-down method over the last 30 years. That is, we'd expect the growth of big corporates to share the benefits of their growth with small and mid-sized companies and ordinary citizens. But we've all realized that this model doesn't work for Korea anymore. We should now widen our scope to get economic stimulus from increased household income and consumption.
Maybe 2 or 3 years from now, the end of Moon Jae-in administration, or even during the next president's term for the impact to be seen. So the people shouldn't expect results to show up immediately. And the government should also do its best not to lose consistency in its policies.
오정희, Business Daily.
There's been growing talk of rolling out an extra budget to spur job creation. In fact, it was one of President Moon Jae-in's key campaign pledges. But now there are questions as to whether this would be necessary, as recent economic indicators show that the Korean economy may be on a better track for recovery. For more on this, our Kim Min-ji joins us in the studio today. Hi, Min-ji. All right, so there are a lot of factors to consider at this point.
Yes, you're right. In the past administrations, extra budgets were implemented when the country's economy was considered to have hit rock bottom. But with recent economic data improving, there's been a debate on whether an extra budget is necessary. The government says it will be directed at job creation, but it looks like it'll have a bumpy road ahead.
One of President Moon Jae-in's campaign pledges was to draw up a supplementary budget to breathe life into the economy and create quality jobs.
사람 중심의 경제 성장을 위해 대규모 재정 자금을 추가 편성 집행하겠습니다. 장기 경기 침체가 지속되는 상황에서 재정이 적극적인 역할을 해야 한다는 것은 오바마의 미국의 회복과 재투자 법안이 만들어낸 일자리 성과로도 확인되었습니다.
More precisely, the president has vowed to create 810,000 jobs in the public sector. Landing jobs has been particularly difficult for the country's young people. The youth jobless rate stood at 11.2% last month, the highest for the month of April since 1999, and much higher than the country's average 4.2%. Finance Ministry has also hinted that it may employ stronger fiscal measures. In its monthly economic assessment report last week, it said it will carefully manage market risks while using fiscal measures which could include an extra budget. It was the first time the ministry mentioned the possibility of drawing up a supplementary budget since President Moon took office. But there are arguments against unleashing more spending. Recently, there's been improvements in the economy driven by the country's exports. GDP also expanded 0.9% in the first quarter, accelerating from the 0.5% growth in the fourth quarter. On top of that, winning approval from the National Assembly will be a challenge, with an opposition majority that may not want to greenlight an extra budget.
So what conditions need to be met in order to draw up an extra budget?
Usually under Korean law, an extra budget is drawn up in case of war, natural disasters, or when there's a drastic change in inter-Korean relations. In the past Park Geun-hye administration, an extra budget was drawn up following the outbreak of MERS in 2015 and in the wake of the government's corporate restructuring scheme in 2016, which led to massive layoffs in the manufacturing sector.
Usually, an extra budget is used to prop up growth or when there's a major shock to the economy. Until late last year, the Finance Ministry had said it will look at first quarter economic data to decide whether to draw up a supplementary budget, but figures came out better than expected. There shouldn't be a big problem because it's aimed at job creation, and it isn't that big, but it could face opposition at the National Assembly.
Because the ruling Democratic Party of Korea does not hold a majority in the National Assembly, it may be hard to get the bill through, especially since opposition parties have criticized Moon's pledge to create jobs in the public sector. Some experts have also said in order to create a virtuous cycle and get the economy going, job creation must be led by the private sector. This way, it will gradually prop up consumption and the government will be able to collect taxes and step up government spending.
All right, so latest numbers have shown that the economy is showing signs of recovery, but then there are concerns that such developments may be temporary.
You're right, but if we take a look at some figures first, recently there's been an improvement in the economy driven by the country's exports. Exports rose more than 24% in April from a year ago, up for 6 straight months. They had been on a decline for nearly 2 years, but now they are back on an upward trend. Looking at the broader economy, the country's GDP expanded 0.9% in the first quarter. It's still weak and in the 0% range for 6 straight quarters, but a pickup from the 0.5% growth seen in the fourth quarter of last year. But like you said, there are concerns it may be temporary. The improvement in figures are due in part to a base effect, and the recovery only applies to certain sectors like petrochemicals and semiconductors. In addition, the country still faces sluggish consumption amid record high household debt of roughly $1.3 trillion. In a recent survey of experts by the Korea Economic Research Institute, the majority said they don't expect the country to be on full recovery track until 2019.
Then what are some of the downside risks or challenges, and also what should the government do to address those issues?
Well, experts agree that the biggest external uncertainty lingering now is the expansion of protectionist sentiment, followed by geopolitical risks stemming from North Korea and China's unofficial sanctions on Seoul for deploying a U.S. missile defense system. At home, the delay in corporate restructuring and decline in competitiveness of key industries, with Chinese rivals catching up, have been cited as risk factors. Going forward, experts say the new government's economic policies should be aimed at achieving sustainable growth.
The government's key focus needs to be on economic revitalization. This eventually will lead to job creation and better welfare. There's a lot of emphasis on job creation in the public sector, but this should only be a small part. The government will also need to boost the private sector by easing regulations and fostering an environment where fair transactions are made.
Experts have also said the government will need to be more clear on its economic blueprint, since so far everything has been based on President Moon's campaign pledges. They say this will help companies lay out management guidelines and plans for investment accordingly. So while the government has shown its strong will to fire up the economy, it will need to better communicate details on its economic policies.
Well, hearing all this is definitely going to be a bumpy ride ahead for the new government.
That's right.
Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you.
The Moon Jae-in government has announced that it will temporarily shut down a number of coal-fired power plants as an emergency measure to get a handle on Korea's bad air. This as the new administration's policy could open the door for more LNG use in the days to come. Our Eunice Kim explains.
Amid a public outcry over Korea's smog and fine particulate matter problem, the new government has declared an emergency closure of at least 8 coal-powered plants 30 years or older next month. And with its focus on renewables, changes to the energy picture here look imminent. Currently, the bulk of Korea's energy comes from coal-powered plants, some 40% of it in fact. Nearly a third comes from nuclear sources, while liquefied natural gas accounts for 22% and oil 2.6%. So how does it work? While wholesaler KEPCO purchases the electricity from the plants for distribution, it's Korea Power Exchange that authorizes the producers to generate certain amounts of power, which is largely based on cost effectiveness. And of them all, nuclear power is the cheapest at 5.71 per kilowatt hour based on April's rates, followed by coal at 51 per kilowatt hour, then LNG, and oil at more than 145 won per kilowatt hour. This system could change soon. In March, the National Assembly passed a bill that would require not only the price, but also the environmental and social impacts to be considered when prioritizing power production. The government will work out a comprehensive plan to execute the revised arrangement in the coming months, but it's possible the import of U.S. shale gas could rise, together with overall power prices. Eunice Kim, Business Daily.
An increasing number of brick-and-mortar banks are going digital to cut costs and remain competitive, but this is creating a whole set of new problems. Our Lee Ju-young tells us more.
A mobile banking platform that allows users to make transactions just with voice command. It also offers simple payment methods and iris authentication technology. Equipped with AI functions, these services rolled out by brick-and-mortar banks like Uribank are making it increasingly convenient for customers to engage in non-face-to-face transactions.
We want to build a unified channel to make non-face-to-face transactions easier and safer.
As conventional banks roll out better strategies for digital services, they're looking to close down more brick-and-mortar branches to cut costs, bringing down the number of new hires and ATM devices along with it. Take Citibank Korea, for example. It says it will slash the number of its branches to nearly a fifth this year, which would put the total at just 25 around the nation from 126. This has led to rising conflicts between labor and management.
Closing down the only branch that exists in the city or province is not fulfilling its role as a commercial bank. Instead of closing 80% all at once, they should do it gradually.
KB Kookmin's efforts to remain competitive by extending business hours in exchange for a flexible work schedule have also been met with strong resistance. Employees say they're now working late into the night without the extra flexibility.
Banks are trying to figure out how to reorganize branches that were once the main windows for customer contact. They're also trying to figure out how to bring on more experts while relocating existing employees.
While banks push into new territory to remain competitive, they also face the challenge of meeting the demands of older customers who still prefer in-person transactions over those requiring newer technology. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
And that brings us to the end, but we'll be back tomorrow with more business news that matters to you, so don't forget to check back with us then. Thanks for watching and see you soon.